Welcome to Around the Fire, a space for conversations to nurture hearts and build lives following Jesus, thinking more deeply about big ideas and how to apply them.
Hello.
Hello.
That was Jonny.
Still
Hi,
am.
Jonny. Still am.
Yep.
And I am still Sarah.
Well done.
Yeah, great. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Around the Fire. We love having conversations and building community around what it looks like to follow Jesus in our actual lives. You are very, very welcome. And we are on episode 3 of a little kind of mini Easter trio.
Sure.
Triplet,
yeah.
That's the one I'm going for that we're doing. And we have been taking a bit of a deep dive into Matthew chapter 26. So if you haven't seen the other 2 episodes on that, I would encourage you to go back and watch those because I really enjoyed the conversations we've had.
Decent.
And in our next episode, we've got a really, really special guest as well. So,
Fun.
kind of stay tuned for that. But for this one, we have now moved the action, the narrative. We've followed it all the way through the 75 verses of, I keep saying that. I got to stop saying that.
Yeah.
Of Matthew 26. But we want to take a conversation around this moment that happens with Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. So I'm going to read just the 10 verses of it, so it kind of gives us a context. Then we're going to have a bit of a conversation around what the garden represented and why that's such an important part of Scripture. And then we're also going to talk a little bit, I know, shock horror because it's me, surprise, about prayer. I know, very excited. So let me read. We're in Matthew 26 from verse 36. It says, "Then Jesus went with his disciples to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to them, 'Sit here while I go over there and pray.' He took Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee along with him, and he began to be sorrowful and troubled. Then he said to them, 'My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me.' Going a little farther, he fell with his face to the ground and prayed, 'My Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me. Yet not as I will, but as you will.' Then he returned to his disciples and found them sleeping. 'Couldn't you men keep watch with me for 1 hour?' he asked Peter. 'Watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak.' He went away a second time and prayed, 'My Father, if it is not possible for this cup to be taken away unless I drink it, may your will be done.' When he came back, he again found them sleeping because their eyes were heavy. So he left them and went away once more and prayed the 3rd time, saying the same thing. Then he returned to the disciples and said to them, 'Are you still sleeping and resting? Look, the hour has come, and the Son of Man is delivered into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us go. Here comes my betrayer.'" Oh, mic drop.
Here we go.
So we find the story has moved. Jesus and his disciples have moved out of the city of Jerusalem, just on the edges, in a place called the Mount of Olives, where the Garden of Gethsemane is found. Jesus has asked all of his disciples to pray, and then he's taken Peter, the sons of Zebedee, James and John, with him. What did you call them? The senior leadership team?
Yeah, SLT. Get the high vis on.
And given them more specific instructions and let them into a little glimpse of where he's at and how he's feeling. And ask them to pray. And then he goes and he calls out to the Father. And he uses this imagery of the cup. Essentially, God, if there's any other way that this could go down, if there's any way we could avoid the cross, if there's any way we could avoid my arrest and my trial and all the pain, and
can we do this without suffering?
Yeah, is there any way we can kind of circumnavigate this? And you see this process of prayer unfolding between him and the Father, and some of the failure of his friends, which we talked about in the last episode, and then we get to the end of that, and the narrative continues towards the cross. But we are in a garden. Jonny, tell us about that.
Do you actually want me to talk about that again?
Yeah, I really do, because one of our big themes for Walking Well in 2025 is walking well, I always get this wrong, right, in the garden as friends of God.
Indeed.
And so the fact that we find Jesus in a garden, I think is fascinating. I also think it's fascinating that, and this is not my idea, but as I've been doing some research, to see the way that Matthew draws our attention to these moments of Jesus. It's a bit like behind the scenes of Jesus facing different things at the start of his kind of public ministry. It was in a wilderness place on his own with a temptation situation, and kind of prayer and scripture helping him through that. And then we find him towards the end of his public ministry, literally within a day, he's going to be dead. And he's again, we get a glimpse into this conversation with the Father, into prayer. But I just think it's fascinating that we find ourselves in a garden.
We're always finding ourselves in a garden, in my opinion.
Okay, go on.
Always. So these ideas are always in front of us. From beginning, middle, and end. So Eden, Golgotha, and then the new city, right? If we take some of our frame of reference from that, it's always about a garden, and it's always it's not. So then we need to expand maybe our cultural frame of reference for a garden.
Mm-hmm.
We're not perhaps thinking about picket fences and ornate picture hedges, and that stuff's great. Like, we're not cross with that, but that's not the picture that's being evoked. What's being evoked is life, flourishing. There is health. There is food. There is sustenance. There is water. There is the component and the composite parts for life are found always in the garden. And so we will always find God in the garden because he is always those things. So then what we, in our tradition, we believe what we get to choose to do about that is then the rest of the story.
Yeah.
So then whether we choose, like we see from all of our collective first parents, our collective genesis from the dirt and the stardust, whether we choose to turn our back on what's good, defined by that what's good belongs to God, and walk away from that, or whether we choose to live in an environment where we're prepared to let what's good belong to God, and then we can operate within the kind of that garden. That life is found, eternal life is found in that, and the cross is a picture of the tree. And then, as we've talked about a lot before, when we get to the end of the story, we will be invited to live in a city that is a garden, where there will be no boundary edges, and those who can't afford to eat there will be invited to eat there, and those who can't afford to drink there will be invited to drink there.
No more suffering.
No more wailing, no more weeping, no more gnashing of teeth. Why? Not because you will have passed a moral assessment, but your faith in Jesus. And that is what is pushing Jesus to the ground in this garden. He knows that, I believe. He knows you, I believe, and me, and knows the. I don't want to use the word consequence, because what we see here is not a fractured, splintered off piece of God having God's arm put up God's back to be like, kind of committed to the bit at this point. Like,
I'm 3.5 years in. Let's go.
Like, that's not that. This is the authority of God on display in ways that still confound us. We still don't understand how this is a display of authority, how this is a display of sovereignty, how this is a display of all power. If God for one moment thought that to evidence his goodness and his righteousness, his holiness, if for one moment God thought that came down to an arm wrestle with evil, that's what he would have done. Yeah. He didn't. Instead, he chose to vacate himself of any and all retaliation, violence, aggravation, irritation, injustice, like separation, like wealth disparity, social disparity, gender disparity, geographical disparity. Just charged, all of this moment is charged here on his own. Like the people who he chose to walk into this moment with let him down. Yeah. It's this narrowing that that Matthew, as he retells the story, helps us to see that there's this moment in the garden where it is literally just Jesus and the Father. Jesus and the Father. Yeah. And Jesus, verse 39, he went on a little farther and bowed with his face to the ground. That's polite Bible language for saying he was lying with his face in the dirt. Yeah. He is, and so then, as I am wont to do, let me extrapolate the extravagant and the extreme here. Are we seeing the Son laying his life down for the sake of those that have failed him at the feet of the Father? Yes, I think we are.
Oh, that's really, unpack that a little bit more, because I think that's maybe something you miss when you like read through and it trips off the tongue, and you have this picture perhaps in your mind, or I've had over the years, Jesus like kneeling and very politely and just sitting in this garden, and maybe he's crying a little bit, but this is a different level of like, he is literally physically surrendering his body and his will to the will of the Father in that, and to the decision that they have made as a Father, Son, and Spirit, that this is going to be the way to restore friendship, to bring the Edenic life, recreation, all of that back as an option for us as humanity.
The same dirt. I don't mean literally like the return to the spot, but like it's the same substance that was waste and wild before he put life in it. He's now got his face in it. The same substance that was inanimate and chaos, he is what is now under his nails and in his eyelashes, and is like being aspirated as he is crying out, if there's any other way we can do this. He was present at the beginning. He knows there's another way we can do this. You can speak it and it's done. Like there's another way that we can do this. If there's any other way that we can do this, but he doesn't. He subjects himself to faithfulness and obedience to death, and becomes entwined with the substance that he animated, and is on his face in that moment. Like this is really, this is so human. Matthew doesn't do this very often, but this is so human. We're told of and this is, so let the speaking out of turn begin. This
Welcome to the podcast, everyone. Hi, this is Around the Fire.
That's what you came for.
We're your hosts, Jonny and Sarah.
This is so out of step with our tradition. The Son of God exclaims that his soul is crushed with grief to the point of death. And then we go a little bit further on, and the eternal is saying, if there's any other way this transient moment can be, I don't know how deep a moment needs to be for the eternal to be upset about it, but that feels significant, right? If you are the person who exists outside of time and that has no, it's impossible for us to comprehend because we are so marshaled by our existence on earth, but God has a perspective that is not that because he exists outside of that, but to be pinched, and so where he is in the Garden of Gethsemane, so like wine press is what you're supposed to be thinking, because that's what it's named after. Like it's where olive oil's made. So
and there would potentially have been olive trees around. And
in
so
the grove.
It's the idea of, we perhaps with a Western kind of worldview see garden with all this lovely pretty grass on the floor. The likelihood is it is dusty and it's dry and there's olive trees everywhere. And so to get oil out of olives, they need to be crushed. So that's kind of, there's all that imagery there as well.
That's not an accident.
No.
You're supposed to be picking that up.
And it's a mountain. If we think about how Matthew narrates the story, Jesus some of that public ministry is Jesus on a mountain sharing his kind of kingdom and the way of welcome and of being. And then we come to this moment where this moment of surrender and faithfulness is on another mountain.
And so we are told of these stages where Jesus, motivated by the fear of death, that I don't know what we do with that, the Son of God,
or at least the fear of the process of what was about to come.
My soul's crushed with the grief of
the sorrow is the point of death.
Like he's being chased by death to a point where the only remember, like, this is God, and so he's got options. Like there are other, we've seen, which is why this is so upsetting and confronting, because we've been through some moments of, we've been through some lumpy bits. We've been through some bits that maybe not everybody has coerced around the ideas. Not everybody wants to join the team. Some have tried it and it's not for them. There are people.
So he's had disappointment and frustration and challenge.
He's had to change towns because they're like not getting it.
He's had to, like his hometown wanted to push him off a cliff.
Wanted to kill him. He's had to leave locations because this, like, from early in public ministry, we've been sort of playing this game of tag where like people who would prefer him to shut up are trying to kill him. Like it's not like ideological objection. Like there's a pretty permanent threat of violence running all the way through. So this isn't then new necessarily. The threat of violence isn't what's new here. Jesus isn't all of a sudden like, oh, this is going to cost me something that I'm unaware of.
Yeah.
This has been constant, like from, again.
And leading towards it. So you read through,
Yeah.
you know, the start of Matthew 26 is Jesus, in 2 days I will be handed over to be crucified.
Well, right.
Essentially.
So then even if before we get to public ministry, even before his birth, he's being chased by death before he's even brought into life. Like this is constantly part. So that's not new to Jesus. Like that bit is very familiar with.
And he picks that as a story around the Last Supper.
Yep.
You know,
Death's always it's always going to be part of it. So like so then what's happening here? What's happening in this moment? That this seems to be different. This seems to be significant. This seems to be, we haven't reacted like this to any of these other potentially similar threats. I think that's probably what's being told to us.
Yeah, that Matthew wants us to know, like we are on the cusp of something.
Something's
we are
about
on
to
the
change.
eve of something that will
change everything.
Will change everything.
Because Pete and James and John have
will
been here
cost
with
him
him
everything.
before as well. And within the tradition where we are in the festival kind of rotation, you stay up late telling stories.
Yeah.
And so like it's not like, well, they've had a big day, Jesus, so like give them a break. Like we are conditioned by this moment. We're meant to be staying up late. We're partying. We are celebrating freedom. We are remembering the story of how we were delivered and how we're redeemed and how we're set free. And we've got good news to tell.
Formed a community of people to follow him.
Regathered people, delivered people, and we stay up late celebrating that. And we have ceremonial meals to celebrate that. And we have bread and wine to tell that story. And we do all the things. And so like they're conditioned to respond positively to this moment. And then something is different this time. Yeah. So Jesus goes up to a place of crushing and asks his nearest and dearest, hey, like, I'm worried. This is maybe a bit too contemporary. Podcast at elimlifechurch.co.uk. If you have a different reading of this moment, I don't know what we do with the Son of God confessing to having anxiety.
Sorrowed and troubled. Yeah.
This is a point of anxiety. In contemporary culture, I think we would say Jesus acknowledges he doesn't feel safe anymore. Yeah. The anxiety, the intrusive thoughts, the anxiety, the nervous, I'm now projecting modernity into this space. The OCD's kicked in. He's looking for a way to control this in a way that brings peace to his soul. Yeah. My soul's crushed to the point of death. I need to do something. I need to do something. I need to do something. What do I need to do? I need to get to a high place and I need to get with my Father. I need to speak to the Father. Boys, can you come with me? Can you just, I'm flipping out a little bit. Can you just keep me safe? Just come with me. I just need to be, he's asking to be comforted in this moment, right? Yeah,
and he's asking for their presence with him in that moment.
Lads, I just need you around. I don't need you to do anything. I just need you to stay here with me. Just be awake when I come back. You've seen me do this 100 times.
I taught you how to pray. You know how to pray.
Do this. Just do that. I'm freaking out a little bit. And I don't know what they're thinking, but they're not thinking because they fall asleep 3 times.
And that's not the conversation. We've had a conversation about failed friends, but for Jesus, that can only have added to his sorrow. So I was just looking at the Message paraphrase, and it says he plunged into an agonizing sorrow, and then he said, this sorrow is crushing my life out. So like picking up on all of those themes, all of those ideas, and he's like, stay here and keep vigil with me. And so in some contexts and cultures, that idea of keeping vigil, you understand what that means. That means like staying awake and being with someone through sorrow, through difficulty. Then that doesn't happen. That doesn't happen. And so we see this process unfolding of Jesus praying, of Jesus crying out, of Jesus, falling on his face. I think there's something about like his physicality in this. Like
very much
it's
so.
a very, in other gospel accounts, it talks about, there's a description of his sweat is like drops of blood, So like that's a different kind of perspective, visceral, but it is this sense of, I've run out of road. This is, we're at the point where, for a lot of the time, he's like, my time has not come, the time's not yet. Like, don't say anything about this, don't share this yet. And now he's like, no, the time has come. Like, and at the end he says, doesn't he, like, look, the hour has come. He's like...
So the escalation of that worry of like, the worst thing's going to happen, the worst thing's going to happen, the worst thing's going to happen, the worst thing's getting nearer to happening, the worst thing's getting nearer to happening, the worst thing is not happening.
Yeah.
Like there was a resolve to me in those words of like, I've done everything I can to put this off and distance myself from this. There's nothing else I can do other than go through this now.
Yeah.
Like I'm pretending this isn't what Jesus is saying, but for us, we like if you've got something looming on your metaphorical horizon, you can distract yourself, you can apply best practice, you can reach for your best friends, you can perform your best and then ultimately you come to a point where in holiness, you have to surrender yourself to the will of God and say, I am the only thing I can do now is go through this.
Yeah.
The only thing now is to submit myself to the will of God in something that I didn't ask for, I can't control, and I wouldn't choose. Is what we see, and we see that in the escalation of the language, right? Like I'm anxious, I'm worried. Stay here with me, lads. Please take 2. I'm going to go and petition. And so I'm going to lob everything at this. God, if there's anything that we can do this a different way, speak now. Like now is I'm here. We've stopped anything and everything else. There's no distraction. I'm ready to do, tell me what it is.
And I love that you see, so you see in Jesus' language and in his prayer, it just takes you back to the Lord's Prayer, right? So the prayer that he taught his disciples and they were like, teach us how to pray. He's saying, yet not as I will, but as you will. He's saying, may your will be done. You see this process of prayer, of coming back to the Father again. And he's praying essentially the same kinds of things, but it's like this process of like, let your will be done. As you will. This process of relinquishing and yielding and surrendering, but he's doing it in a moment of prayer, of exchange with the Father.
Right, and Hebrews 5 teaches us that, so Hebrews 5:8 of this moment says, even though Jesus was God's son, he learnt obedience from the things he suffered.
I know, it's wild, isn't it?
So then you and I have had half a conversation prior to this conversation about, so then let's pivot, let's take all of that awareness and let's pivot it into a conversation around prayer. Around what then are we learning in prayer? What then do we take from Jesus' example in this moment of from the crush, from the middle of the press, from where life is being crushed out of you, what the text tells us is that Jesus learned faithful obedience through suffering. He didn't get an answer that changed his circumstance. Talk about that.
So I often use this, I refer to this account in my own life. This has been a place that I've lived, of encountering Jesus in the garden in that way in a difficult season of my life. But I will often, if people are going through suffering or challenges or difficulties, I will often use this and read this and meditate on this and pray this with them. Because I think one of the things is we would often say like, I literally was at a church recently and someone said to me, what do you do when God doesn't answer your prayer? And my response was, not in a glib way, well, I think no prayer goes unheeded or unheard, but we may not always get the answer that we want. And so then we had a big conversation about like what prayer is. And for me, that's part of what you see here is Jesus saying, if it's possible, like he's been betrayed, he's been abandoned, he knows what's going to happen. He's going to be arrested and tortured and mocked, and he's going to die this horrific death on the cross. And awareness of all this that's facing him and all of his kind of close friends abandoning him and failing him, he still is willing to come to the Father and bring what's on his heart to the Father. And so I think there's something we learn about prayer here. Not only your will be done, your kingdom come, which is part of the Lord's Prayer, not only that sense of yielding in faithful obedience, but also that willingness to honestly bring what is on your heart and in your life to God without fear of judgment or condemnation or, the Father's not like, oh, get lost. Do you know what I mean? It's like that, but I think we see Jesus just being very honest. And I think that's one of the things I'll often say is we can bring our honesty. And it's intense. It's like it feels like a wrestle, like if Jesus hasn't done anything to deserve what's about to happen to him. We know it's part of the plan to rescue humanity. It's part of kind of the way that God shows his love for us. But he knows that that he's going to have to go through this. And so often then you go, well, why bother praying?
Right.
Like, why bother praying?
Yeah.
And I think actually as you read through that process, what you see is Jesus, I think, coming to a place of peace, come into a place of, I'm ready to face whatever comes next. You know, I'm looking to the Father. And so there's this exchange, there's this sense of, I think, proximity and presence and process is what we were thinking about earlier, weren't we? And that seems to be the invitation, whether or not we get the outcome we've asked for. The outcome is God's responsibility. But if it seems as if Jesus is showing us that one of the things we can do is bring our honest to him. And I think I often use the idea, and I've used this before, so it's not like original or new to me or anything, but like I think we think of prayer as a vending machine, and I think God thinks of it as a conversation or a comfy chair. Like I think we can approach conversation with God or praying on behalf of others or asking for things. And I'm a big believer in asking big, like go big or go home when it comes to prayer, I think. That's just my opinion. But I think what we see here is that the primary thing is this exchange, this relationship. We don't get the other side of the conversation. We only get Jesus' side of the conversation. But by the time he's about to be arrested, we see him come into that place of acceptance. Even the third time when he goes to the disciples, to the team, and they've fallen asleep, he doesn't tell them off. Do you know what I mean? He's not like, oh, guys, third time. He just goes, okay, I'm going. And so you see this process unfolding, but you also see he's so honest. Like, he's honest with his team, those ones he's kind of pulled closer, and he's really honest with the Father. And I feel like this becomes permissioning then for those of us who are following Jesus to do the same. Like, we can be really, really honest. And this from a person who is like a glass half full girl, you know, who I love nothing better than to put a silver lining on something or a bow on something or to see the good in something. Jesus is not pretending here. He's not pretending that this is going to be okay. He's not pretending that this isn't painful. He's not pretending that this isn't going to cost him everything. But he brings it to the Father. And I would want to say and encourage people that however you feel, whatever is going on in your world or your life or your mind, that you can bring that to God. And also you can allow your body to speak in prayer. If you can't find the words, you know, it says that he falls on the ground, like his physical body is experiencing this suffering and trauma as well. And I think that cries out to God. I think there's something about the fact that Jesus came as a human, you know, like that he had an embodied experience. And God doesn't take the plan away. God doesn't take what's about to happen away. But I think there's a level of comfort that comes to Jesus in that. And in other Gospels, it says that he sends angels to comfort him. But I think you can see just even from Matthew's account that as he gets to the end and he's ready to face, like, look, my betrayer's coming, it is with a sense of settled comfort in where he's been. Now, that might just be my reading of it. I'm not an expert. So, you know, I don't want to say things that aren't there. But yeah, I think there's an honesty and there's a mystery
Talk
to embrace. I think I've talked about it a little bit before on the podcast, but I don't know how well we live and walk with Jesus when things happen outside of our control and we don't see an answer in the way that we want to see an answer. And that then can leave us questioning either, have we done something wrong or is there something wrong with God?
Right.
And so I think what happens often for people in my kind of pastoral experience is that Jesus didn't deserve this, right? So he's in the garden, he didn't deserve it, but in this exchange of prayer, he turns to God in his moment of need, he prays again and again. We see an element of him being strengthened to face what's about to come next, and he leads off into it. What I think happens often for like our walking with Jesus is we come to these moments and either it makes us question who God is, or it makes us question our ability to connect with God, or how prayer works, or, you know, and both of those things disconnect us from God. They isolate us from God. And it seems to be that the invitation is to bring those kinds of questions to God as well. Like, if there's any way, what is this about? And yet not my will, but yours be done.
Yep.
So even though he knew why he was there and what he was about to face, he knows that. He has an element of knowing what that is. We don't always get that.
Okay.
Like when we're going through suffering or challenge or difficulty, we don't always get that. Okay. And so I will often come back to this sense of we don't know why things happen the way they happen. And I feel, and I say this all the time as well, like it feels like it's a cop-out when you say that. Like we don't know why, but we're not God. We don't. But are we willing to trust him anyway? Are we willing to come back to him anyway? Are we willing to hold on to what we do know to be true about Jesus, which is often my invitation. Like, what do we know to be true about him? That he is faithful and that he is present. And so he can lead us through. And that means we have to yield any sense of, I want it to go my way, I need to be in control, I have to know why, or there has to be a reason for it.
Okay.
And I think I've come across people a lot often who will say, there has to be a reason, you know?
Right.
And sometimes there isn't. And sometimes it is just that life is painful, but is God good enough anyway? And my kind of suggestion or encouragement would be that yes, he is.
Talk to us just really quickly. Give us a definition of yield if people haven't come across that idea before.
So if you've ever been to America or you've ever seen an American TV show, you will sometimes see the word yield on the pavement.
Oh, yeah.
And basically it means to stop, to let the will of another.
Yeah.
So if you bring a car to an end, it's a bit like a give way sign, but it means something. Yield means like, I am going to stop to give way for you to go past. And
Super
so
helpful.
that sense of yielding in this is like, I am going to relinquish my control, my will, all of the things that I would want in this moment to the will of God, to the ways of God, to the wisdom of God.
Super
and
helpful.
So I think, I don't know how you can live without mystery. Like, how can you live without embracing the fact that there is mystery, and you are never going to be able to understand all there is to know about God, even though we spend lots of podcasts trying to explain God and trying to explain like how to follow God. There will always be an element of like, what, why, you know? And so I think if we are constantly and consistently wanting answers, I don't know that we'll always get them. Or we won't always get the answers we want. We will still follow God anyway. Jesus is like, I'm still going to be faithful. I'm still going to follow. I'm still going to walk.
I have thoughts that we might come back to, but we need to have a break.
Yeah.
No, it's really good. Really, really good. We're going to take a brain break. If you are new here, if this is the first episode that you're watching, we are trying to just give you an opportunity to stretch, have a little bit of pause. We know you have autonomy as human beings created in the likeness and image of God. You can pause whenever you want, but we are proactively just kind of bringing ourselves to a bit of a communal point of rest within our
look at that.
shared exercise of what we're doing. So producer Andy likes to have fun with these moments, and I hope I'm setting up for a win and he hasn't run out of things that he's looking forward to putting in here, and he's like, I was just going to put brain break on the screen, sorry. But it's supposed to be...
He's going to use it in Comic Sans. That's what he's going to use.
Don't upset Andy. It's supposed to just be a little bit of a tonic to big ideas and how to apply them. We are going to take 30 seconds or however long producer Andy decides is the appropriate break that we need, and then we'll be right back.
Well, welcome back from your brain break. I hope you had a great brain break. The more I'm saying that, brain break. Sounds very odd. But anyway, we clearly didn't have a great one, so we're good to go. No, we are coming into the second half of our episode, our third episode on Easter from Matthew 26. We're thinking about the garden. We're thinking about Jesus in the garden and his prayer. And if you've got any questions or feedback or suggestions, we love building community online. So you can get in touch, podcast@elimlifechurch.co.uk. So Jonny, back into the garden.
I know.
Let's go.
Back through the gate. We'll go back into the walled garden. Probably
for those who are listening only, he did a little open of the gate and a close back of the gate. Nice.
It's also, let's remember, because it's not said in the text, but if you know where you are and what's happening, it is implied in the text. This is like nighttime.
Yeah.
Like we are in, like, this is not oh, it's a bit dusky and cute and fun. And, oh, look at the lights over Jerusalem. And like, this is
Everyone else is asleep.
everybody else is like, they're either having a great time, telling stories, celebrating, doing all the things they're supposed to be doing. And the fullness of all of those moments that they are celebrating in part is sat screaming on a mountain.
Yeah.
Like that contrast is also not supposed to be missed. That the radiant glory of God is currently contending with darkness. Like in darkness. Like that's brooding on this culturally significant mountain and place and time, because he's about to be raised up in a completely different way. There are some rise and fall motifs happening here. So Jesus has committed himself to the earth, and he's about to be raised up on a cross, and he's going to be committed to the earth, and then he's going to be raised up.
I've not seen that before. Nice.
Yeah. So there's some of those motifs that are happening here as well. Everything is something.
Your name is Jonny Harding.
Everything is something. So that's happening here. Because why do we say that? Like, we believe, we are the team and the people that believe Jesus is God. And so it is completely reasonable to ask, which is why we get it later on as those who scoff, like, oh, if you're God, just get yourself down then. Like, just fetch for the boys and they'll hook you down. It's done. It's completely reasonable to assess God by the limits of our preferred metrics of power, of rule, of justice, of hope, of like it's completely. So I was thinking before the break, you kind of led us in this conversation. Jesus is about to, by some traditions, so kind of from this moment, from his arrest, it's in some traditions known as the Way of Sorrows, and we're just about to tip over into that path. And you sort of did a similar thing, and you tipped us over into this path of like, well, what is life without mystery, and what is life without, not knowing all the answers, and what will we do with that? And it, like, there is, I'm not bashing anybody who is not of faith. It would be unusual for them to be listening to this, but they, a caricature of those without faith is like, I just believe in what I can see. And from a theist's point of view, from somebody with faith, we often would couch that as like, that's understandable, but maybe a juvenile way of looking at life. And that's a way of compartmentalizing experience without perhaps walking the way of sorrow. That's potentially, without accusing anybody of anything who's not here to defend themselves, there's potentially a way of like just making that neat and tidy and rationalizing some of your experience, or bypassing your experience to go, well, that just lives in that box over there, and we don't open that box over there. Thank you very much. Thank you. And so the way of Jesus invites us into a fuller experience, I would argue, by going, no, we're going to open that box. We're
going to look at it. We're going to walk through it. We're going to face it.
We're going to figure out what's going on here. And so then being prepared to lean into mystery is perhaps not as you might have encountered as an apologetic, as like, well, it's just a cop-out. Like, just saying, oh, well, it's God's will is just a cop-out. Because there is nothing that Jesus is going through here that's a cop-out.
No.
There's nothing that he is suffering in this moment that is the easy option. He is willingly about to commit himself to the way of sorrow. That's not the ambiguity of, well, it's the will of God, and that sometimes them's the breaks. Sometimes you get it, sometimes you don't. Like, the creator of all things is crushed to a point of death and leans into that moment.
Yeah, it does.
And I would encourage us, wherever this finds us, to not have like the questioner's bias in these things of life, in that often I wonder if our questions come from a place of, we're really fishing for an answer. Like, we're asking the question to set up the thing that we want to get. And so we kind of go, well, it's just sort of the will of God, isn't it? And hoping that we can exempt ourselves from any sort of, like, if this cup could pass me by, that would be great. Where's the will of God? So I don't need to do that. And like, no, the will of God seems to invite us into the depths of mystery, to the point of everything that had been, which is why I'm thinking out loud, but I wonder if that's why Matthew chooses this moment to make Jesus the most human that he makes him, because Matthew is choosing to put to one side the, like, divine get out of jail free card.
Yeah, because later on, like when Jesus is arrested and Peter chops off the ear and he's like, no, I could call like thousands of angels to come and like sort this moment out. He's like, it's not that there is not resource available to me or power available to me or the ability to manage this moment available to me. He's doing something different with this.
It's an invitation to walk through sorrow.
Yeah.
It's an invitation to find peace in mystery. It's an invitation to not limit ourselves to what we can see, and not to articulate our existence by the outcomes that we interact with
and that we prefer. Yeah.
And the way of Jesus then is not behave like this and you'll get into heaven at the end. The way of Jesus is all parts of life are being redeemed and renewed and restored for the glory of God, even the bits you don't want to look at, even the bits that you'd prefer not to happen, even the bits that if like you wouldn't invite for your worst enemy, even at the points of betrayal and brokenness and desperation and sorrow.
Because it's all happening here, isn't it?
It's all like in
this little microcosmic moment.
Yeah, it's all happening.
The picture of the big
as Jesus is face down in the dirt, in the dark. Like that, if that's not a picture of death, I don't know what
and then
is.
that like drawing in that Matthew's been doing of like, and this. So this is why a lot of commentators, I think I've said this. Maybe I can't remember if I said it today or not, but like this is why a lot of people say this is like the most vulnerable moment, not so much the crucifixion that physically is really, really obviously vulnerable and painful.
It's torturous, isn't it? It's a different
but this is that moment of like
emotional.
Everything. If you think about like the emotions and the relational and the physical and just all of that, and also has come off the back of like a triumphal arrival into the city where everyone's really excited to see him, and very quickly that's changed.
Hosanna.
And so very quickly that's changed. And we're in this moment within the last 24 hours of his life.
It's all gone wrong.
And so to be lying on the ground in the dirt, in the dark, I never thought about it in that way before. Yeah. It kind of preempts the tomb, right? It preempts that sense of like, well, I am going to lay down my life. And he's the creator. He was at creation when creation was spoken into being. Yeah. Father, Son, and Spirit, let there be, and there was. And he's submitting himself and yielding himself to this, even though there are thousands of angels at his, I just hit the mic, thousands of angels at his command. Yeah. But he is willing to go low, literally and physically, and in every single way. You're right, part of what we are then invited into is to recognize our preference would be, God, take me out of it. I think God's response often is, let me take you through it.
Right. I think... again, I'm thinking out loud as you're helping us understand these passages. I think for Peter, James, and John, those nearest to Jesus and called by name to be in that space, in their failed friends' moments as their body cries out for rest, when they should be conditioned for staying up late and like doing all the things.
It wasn't unusual. This wasn't their first Passover, folks.
Like they've grown up doing this stuff. They know tonight's a long night.
Yeah.
The conditions are set fair for them to perform well here. And they fail. And I'm again, this is my projection, and I'm just offering this for us to, think on for a little bit. I wonder then if the lie that their bodies lead them in is, I don't want to see my king like that. Like there's a version of success that just whispers to them, you don't want to see him like that, really. Yeah. Like you don't want...
You want to see the person you have trusted in look less
humiliated.
Than,
Like that's not what winning looks like. Lads, he's gonna be fine. He's having one of his moments again, like where we don't really understand it, but usually with the pattern to this point,
he'll come back and tell us what he was talking about.
And we go to the next place and we'll heal people
There'll be a
and
big
we'll
miracle,
feed people and there'll be a miracle. And because remember, like we're gonna win, like we're gonna rule all that, because they're hearing this every day, like all day, every day. This is what my kingdom looks like. This is what it's gonna look like. This is how it's gonna happen. Jesus has been telling them this story every single day.
Well, N.T. Wright says about like when we get to this point, you see the Sermon on the Mount, you see the Beatitudes literally lived out in the life of Jesus, being humbled, being cursed, all of that. And then that being a place actually of ultimate blessing for humanity is because Jesus was willing and able to go through that, brings us to that place of coming under the blanket of God's blessing and his joy and his well-being.
And all of our own versions of placing ourselves in the story, which we should do, by the way. Like you have to, for this to to affect the way that we live. You have to see yourself in the story and in all of the parts of the story, because we would hold that that's part of how, you wrestle that stuff into application. So then part of what are the parts of us that would prefer to sleep than look at that version of King Jesus? What are the parts of us that would prefer to give into, you don't really want to see him like that. You don't really want to, of our tribe and of our tradition, we are big fans of returning Jesus.
We love Resurrection Sunday. We love the fact that Jesus is coming back again one day. Like, we love that.
And we will continue to love that.
Yeah.
And that is right to love that. And it is right to point people to that, because that's where our hope is, because Jesus didn't stay suffering. He didn't stay silent. He didn't stay dead. So it's right to do that. But this is as much a part of the story of redemption as Resurrection Sunday is. And so I wonder then for us, how much are we then spiritually, metaphorically, allowing ourselves to just doze off and look the other way when we hear Jesus say, if there's any other way that we can do this, if there's any other way that we can get through this. This
was probably the first and only time they would have heard that kind of prayer.
He's wailing. Yeah. He's wailing. He's crying out to his Father in heaven. And I don't know how far away they were because I wasn't there, but he's crying out in agony and they're asleep. I don't know what you can sleep through, but when you come into the office, be like, oh, did you hear the thunder last night? And you're like, what? Who? But the person that they have abandoned all others for is wailing in the dark on their face, and they're asleep. That feels to me like we're leaning into the unredeemed parts of humanity to be like, I don't want a king who wails on his face in the dirt. I want a king who gets his own way, and I want a king who, when he enters the room, everybody goes, look at the riz on this guy. I want a king who has the command of angels and supernatural forces. I want the king who feeds people and heals people. I want the king who raises people from the dead. They're not asleep because they're confident in his ability because they've seen him raise people from the dead. They're asleep because they're figuratively looking the other way. Their sleep is a picture of death, right? They've been invited into this place, and what they found is they don't have what's required to sustain life.
Yeah, really good.
They die. Now, not literally. So then let's come full circle. What happens when Adam and Eve leave the garden? They die. Not literally, but spiritually, they die. They're separated from what's good that belongs to God. So then throw it forward to the end, because everything happens in triplicate. We believe in threes. So then when we come to that picture of the garden at the end, where is life to be found when we are completely dependent? You can't afford it. You can't grow it. You can't fix it. You can't hoard it. You can't keep it. You can't shape it. You can't prune it. You can't organize it. But you are invited into the place where there will be eternal life, sustained by and for the glory of God. That's this moment right here. And I think there are many, many instances in moments in our contemporary existence where we are called up and into that space, and we go, I'm just gonna grab 40. I'm just gonna have 40 weeks. And metaphorically, we choose death, where Jesus is inviting us into life through sorrow. The way of sorrow is inviting us into come on.
It's blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. So it brings us full circle back to, what Jesus is declaring and establishing and saying, this is what the kingdom looks like. It doesn't look like avoiding it or spiritually bypassing it. It looks like walking through it. And part of, again, the joy of this is that one of the ways in which Jesus walks through it is coming to the Father in prayer. And asking his community to come around him. Now, in this moment, they don't get that right. They fall asleep. They're not willing to look at it. They're not willing to look at suffering. They're not willing to, or not willing and able to do the thing that Jesus asked them. But I think one of the notes of hope, actually, is that Peter, James, and John, and the other disciples, as you read through the story of how the church community begins, of waiting for the Spirit to come, of facing difficulties and challenges when Jesus has returned to the Father, you see that they have learned some of this stuff, that they do, they are willing to look at suffering, they are willing to look at pain, they are willing to go to some of those places of darkness that maybe have felt scary to them. And now Jesus is not physically present with them. The Spirit is with them and within them. And it seems that they are willing to walk through those things. And that turning to God in prayer accessing relationship with God, that proximity, that presence, that process is now a very natural part of what it looks like for them to follow Jesus. And so we see this moment where that doesn't happen, but you are encouraged to know, oh, they realize and recognize this. And as the community grows and is built, this becomes interwoven into what it looks like to follow Jesus. And so for those of us now who follow Jesus, you're like, oh, that's our invitation too. Whether we feel like we have looked at things before or we haven't, the invitation is to come back. There's no guilt, there's no condemnation, there's no shame. Jesus is not like stood there with his hands on his hips going, oh guys, you could have done better.
Right.
But he's like, no, come, I will walk through this with you. I will lead you through this. I will help you through this. And it will be painful. He's not denying that it's painful. He's sorrowful to the point of death. Like the language is extravagant and wild and raw. And what's happening is the creator of the universe is on his face. Like I had not seen that picture before of like in the dirt. And he's saying, no, come to me with this stuff. Like I will help you through this.
Yeah.
And that sort of sense of like, how does that help us on a wet Wednesday? I think it's that invitation that Jesus knows what it is to go through suffering. Jesus knows what it is to face those things. And so again, in Hebrews, it talks about how he's not like unaware of what we go through in a human experience. He's been there, he's walked that, he's come through that, he's overcome that. And so you would want someone who's done that to lead you through it, so that you get to places of light and to healing and wholeness. Who better to lead you through that than the one who's gone through it ahead of you? And that this suffering is a part of the rescue plan of God, because you read right back into places like Isaiah, where again, that's the story that Jesus picks up when he's talking about, this is my kingdom, this is what I'm thinking. And there's this picture of the servant who's suffering. Yeah. And so it's not an accident, and it's not an unexpected and unhelpful side effect. This is also part of the story of God. And so for those who find themselves in places of suffering, or accompanying and walking with people in places of suffering, this is also part of the story of God. It doesn't mean that God is absent. It doesn't mean that God is not at work. It doesn't mean that God has somehow lost control. It doesn't mean that you have done something wrong or that you haven't prayed something right. It means that this is part of the human experience, and we can trust the one who has walked through it before us.
Yeah, it's great.
And for us.
Really good. Really good. Matthew does a thing that I think is really fun. I'm jumping forward a couple of chapters. Not in 26 anymore.
Not in 26. So exciting.
I think Matthew does this really exciting thing with all of that, because obviously we have to point to like that's not the end of the story.
Yeah. Whoop, whoop, good news.
Honestly, because that's heavy. Supposed to be, the significance of that, we can't turn a blind eye to that. But then there is this moment, the arrest, the trial, the murder, the death, the resurrection, the ascension of Jesus. And then Matthew does this really fun thing in Matthew 28, right at the very end. And it might be familiar to you. You might have heard it couched through the Great Commission. You might have been shouted at to go abroad and tell people about Jesus. But that's not what's happening here.
Also, that's not the conversation for today.
Then the 11 disciples, so actions have consequences, left for Galilee.
Yeah.
We're going back to where we started.
Yeah.
He gives them a mountain of where to go.
Cyclical spiral.
Yep. And so, and then he meets them at the start. He meets them back at the start. And this has been the start this is our introduction to Jesus. This is our introduction, like, from his baptism. This is his introduction for his ministry. This is the introduction for his picking his team. This is like, this is full redemption. Yeah. Like, boys, we're going back to where we started, but everything's different. Yeah. Now,
so you're in familiar places, but everything's changed.
So you're back at the start line. And look how different it is. You are back, ready to go again. And all authority has been given to me, Jesus says. Therefore, let's go. Yeah. Let's go. And they know the story. They know all of the things.
They've come through their own level of suffering through that, right? They've seen Jesus die. They've had to face their own failure and like all the things that they've learned. And the fact that then Jesus is like, no, you're still my plant. Like, you're still invited. You still belong. You're still welcome.
We're at the start line again. And they figuratively, they don't I don't know what the conversation was, but like what we receive is this version of them going, well, what are we going to do? And he's like, everything I taught you to do.
Yeah.
Everything you've seen me do, everything you've seen my life role model, I want you to teach them, I want you to baptize them, and I want you to put them back on the start line and encourage them to go and do the same thing. And the weight of relief that must have been like in that moment, like the joy in that moment,
like it doesn't end here.
Yeah. We go back to the start, but everything is different. And I think Matthew wants you to pick that up. I think Matthew wants you to see, like, oh no, we're back where we started.
Yeah.
Like,
and also that it is possible to come and have those restarts. Like it is possible. He has not hidden any of those details away of how much they messed up and failed. But yet Jesus is like, no, come on, let's go. Because of who I am, because of what I've done. And then ultimately, because I'm going to send the Spirit, you go.
Crack on.
Yeah.
It's really
great.
good. Really
good. Do you want to close in prayer for this one? I'm like,
feels illegal,
no,
doesn't it?
I know it does, and then I'll close out. Go on.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. What would be helpful for us in that? I wonder. I like to do a thing where we help teach people how to pray with their eyes open. I'm a huge fan of, and publicly I will say, hey, can we all close our eyes? And it helps us be less distracted and stop checking Facebook and all that fun stuff. But we've been thinking about eyes closed as a picture of death and looking away and avoiding the things of God. So I wonder for our embodied
really
practice, like this time, if we can pray with our eyes open. And if you don't do that often, it can feel a bit awkward. And you're like, what am I allowed to look at? What am I supposed to be doing? Oh, that bit of skirting board needs painting. Or, I don't know what's happening. That's fine. So it finds you where it finds you. But we're being deliberate in choosing to keep our eyes open and not lean into perhaps a cultural default of eyes closed, head down, hands together. And we want to lean to a kingdom impulse of God, I'm looking at this in the eye. I want to look you in the eye. I want to see your face. I want to hear your voice. So wherever that finds you, I'm going to, in ways that are definitely not unnerving to you, I'm going to look straight down this camera and super chill for everybody. And let me pray for us. Father, I thank you for just these conversations, for this moment, for your invitation for us to know sorrow and pain, but know that that is not the end. These are not things that we have to avoid. We are not crushed to death without the hope of new life, that you have made a way for us to see you and to know you. You place us in community, you surround us with others made in your image for your glory. And Father, for those who are feeling crushed, for those who are feeling the weight of that, for those who feel that they are from a place of death, crying out for any other way, for that situation to change, they are facing things that they didn't ask for, they didn't deserve, and they can't change. And they're feeling the weight in the middle of the night of things that are not of you, from you, or for you. Spirit of God, would you bring peace? Would you bring hope? Father, for those who need to be placed back on the start line, need the invitation to say, hey, let's go again. Let's go again. Let's go whole. Let's go new. Let's go healed. Would you extend your grace and your mercy? And for the rest of us figuring out something between all of those places, would your kingdom come? Would your word speak to us of your ways? Lord, that it would be helpful and point people to who you are for your glory. Jesus, in your name. Amen.
Amen. Oh, great. I like that.
Amen.
So thank you so much for listening. We have a special guest coming for our next episode.
Really good.
You do not want to miss that one. It is going to be an amazing conversation. So we're really excited for you to meet our guest for the next episode. Thank you for listening. If you are watching us on YouTube, I think you're supposed to like and subscribe and share all of the things.
Thanks.
If you're listening to us somewhere, thanks so much for listening to us. Hope we've been, an encouraging accompaniment to your journey. What have you been doing? And we will see you again on the next one.
Amazing. Thanks so much. Bye.
Bye.